What is the wildest things you've seen as an IT? Got called to investigate unplugging a laptop that had malware detected on it. When I arrived, this laptop was in the open with the login information taped to the desk. This laptop was given local admin privileges by someone before my time for some application. This was in an office area that was always unlocked and 10 steps from the entrance of the building. No one was in the office as they went home early, including management. On a laptop filled with everyone's information, SSN, names, addresses, and more, LimeWire, games, and more. The two who worked on this laptop just used it like their personal laptop with occasional work being done on it. The laptop was promptly disconnected from the network, confiscated, and returned for analysis. Yes, there was spyware, and we don't know how much personal info got out. This was reported to higher management. The two who used it disappeared quickly and quietly after that. Story 2. An outgoing software developer put an Easter egg in our ERP before he left. Anyone who typed the word raptor in any text field would have a raptor from Jurassic Park fly across their screen with a loud screech. Only 3 of us on the team knew about it. Little over a year later, during a demo of our asset management module, the manager asked about inputting vehicles. The trainer asked what kind of vehicle he drove, an F-150 Raptor, so the trainer, as a demo, input the vehicle description and bam, "Rawr" comes screeching with this raptor flying across the screen in a room of like 50 to 60 people, including our CBO and most of our upper managers. My wife is one of those upper managers, so she sees me in the back of the room trying so hard not to laugh. She gave me this look like, "Really?" Our boss just calmly said, "Well, that's not a bug or a feature. Looks like we'll need to fix that." He had no idea. The next day, he went back through the commits and saw where it originated. During an after-action meeting, he kept it low-key and just assigned it to me and this other dev who knew about it to take it out. He finished by saying, "And please don't put Easter eggs in our code." Man, if I was in that demo room, I would have been excited as a client. Lol, software's so boring usually. Story 3. Let's name my colleague Mike. It's not his real name, of course, for reasons that will become obvious. Mike was our top help desk guy. Always happy to help out and to guide you through your problem until it is fixed. In the decade I've worked here, I've never seen him get angry at a client. One day, Mike receives a ticket from the VP of our company. VP claims she can no longer log into the system and requests help. Of course, Mike hurries up to her office because that's a pretty big problem, especially for a VP. When he gets to the office, he sees that the VP is able to log in, but the system is now demanding she sets up two-factor authentication. Mike is not surprised by this. 2FA has recently gone from a suggestion to a requirement, so he figures she has difficulties with setting up 2FA and starts explaining how to pair her phone and how everything works. But nope. The VP knows what 2FA is and how it works. She just doesn't want it. She demands Mike to make it go away. Mike is confused but declines. 2FA has become mandatory, like I said, and he can't simply make it go away. So again, he explains that it's required and that she, as VP, is especially crucial to set it up properly. Even the CEO has set it up and has been using it since it was first introduced. But the VP is adamant. She demands an exception and demands it now. But Mike refuses again, mostly because he literally does not have the power to do what she asks, even if he wanted. So the VP takes the next logical step. She calls up the CTO. The CTO is absolutely baffled. All he was told by the VP is that Mike is refusing to help her, and he knows that Mike is our top help desk guy. He wouldn't just randomly refuse help. He marches up to the VP's office to get the finer details. After about 15 seconds of explaining, he instantly sides with Mike and tells VP that she is out of luck and that 2FA is mandatory, no exceptions. Probably realizing she can't just bully the CTO into submission, she finally relents and agrees to set up the 2FA. Mike quickly helps her through, and 5 minutes later, they're out of the office. A few hours later, Mike is called by one of VP's assistants. None of them can log in anymore, they claim. Mike goes back up and guesses they probably are also confused by the now mandatory 2FA. And in a way, they were. As it turns out, they couldn't log in anymore because they were logging in with a VP's account. A bit of questioning later, and the truth comes out. VP has simply been giving out her username and password to her entire team, around 20 people, so they can do her work for her. And that's why she was so adamant on not setting up 2FA. With 2FA enabled, her companions can no longer simply log in to her account. She now has to constantly go around and hand out her 2FA token or do her own work. Mike raises this obvious security concern with his manager, who, according to rumors, face palms and immediately escalates the issue. Higher and higher it goes, with face palms all the way until it comes back to the CTO, who face palms the hardest and mutters, "Of course she did." He schedules an urgent cybersecurity training for her, which she declines. CTO calls her office and explains in quite certain words that this training is not optional and she is expected to be there. Last I heard, she did show up and still has 2FA enabled. Story 4. I worked at a computer repair store for a while out of college, and one time a guy brought in a PC and said that he had malware on it after looking at some material. He was very open about this and said that he has kind of a problem. I didn't think much of it because we see that stuff all the time. I took his desktop in, put it away, and didn't think about it again. Fast forward about a day later, we get to his PC in the queue, and I open it up on our bench, which is open for people to see us work. A new customer comes in, and we start talking about her problem. All of a sudden, I hear insane sounds and turn around to see that the guy has like a 2-minute screensaver that somehow makes sounds and flips through dozens of materials in rapid succession. In a quick moment, me and this lady look at each other, and I look back to see all kinds of stuff. I run over and pulled the plug and profusely apologized to the lady. She was surprisingly cool about it and said, "Yeah, I think that guy needs more help than I do right now. Gosh." I ended up running an initial malware bias scan on it that found like 38,000 malwares, and his screensaver was still intact after we were done with remaining scans with other products and manual deletions. He was very thankful, and I never saw him again. Lol. Story 5. I got a call from the FBI's cybercrime division. They told me to be in a conference room at one of my healthcare clients' offices in an hour. I gathered my team and we went there. We were told that a big medical practice that used our software had been hacked. A hacker had posted a video of himself on a dark website showing him walking around their huge office, which was like 500,000 square feet, and bragging about his skills. He even claimed to have taken over our network. They showed us the video. It turned out the hacker was the night security guard at the office. We quickly checked and saw that he hadn't gotten into our network. They also told us that he had given his notice and that his last day would be Thursday. He had posted a bunch of threats on the dark side about what he would do over the next holiday weekend after he was no longer working there. It turned out that he had actually gotten into the network of the surgery center in the same building. He used that access to turn off the heating and cooling system, the HVAC, for hours during surgeries. On his last day, the FBI showed up at night. They waited for the older security guard to leave the building to check the parking garage. Then they turned off all the power and lights to the big building, locked all the doors, and arrived in about 8 black vans. About 30 agents with weapons got out, searched the building, arrested him, and quickly left. The FBI advised us to shut down our network for a week just in case he had set up any timed device to go off around the 4th of July. We did as they said. It turned out he had a young wife and 2 kids. He was offered a deal to plead guilty and get 3 years in prison, but he decided to go to trial instead. I was one of the witnesses. He was sentenced to 11 years in prison. There was an unexpected twist. The pastor from his church testified as a character witness, saying he had never had any problems with him. But the FBI had hacked into the church's computers with a warrant and found out that he had been fired from his job as the IT guy at the church. The pastor was then charged with lying under oath and was also sentenced to prison. Story 6. I worked for a company that was hired to help a chain of rehab centers. We had just started working with them and were trying to make sure their technology followed the rules for keeping patient information private, which is called HIPAA compliance. Before we came in, their systems were a mess. One of the things we needed to do was get people to stop using their personal cell phones for work and start using the company's desk phones instead. The chief financial officer, the CFO, and some people in the intake department, which is like the sales team, didn't like this change. They didn't want to use the company phones, so they started submitting help tickets every day, saying the phones were broken. They also complained to the CEO and the board of directors, trying to make it seem like we couldn't do our job. They were doing all this just so they could keep using their personal cell phones. Eventually, the owners of our company were called in to meet with the rehab center's CEO and board. They got a lot of criticism for the phone issues, with the CEO saying we were incompetent and asking why we couldn't fix such a simple problem. My boss asked if they had tried testing the phones themselves. When they walked around and tested the phones of the CFO and others, guess what? They all worked perfectly fine. In the end, the CFO and the others who were causing trouble were fired, and we kept the contract to continue our work. At the same company, there was a woman who kept forgetting her password almost every other day. She would call us, very upset, and accuse us of changing her login information. I also did contract work for a natural supplement company. The owner wanted us to remove the Wi-Fi access point because they thought it was making them feel sick. There was a law firm where the IT guy they had on site decided to hide their Wi-Fi access point inside a metal duct so that people wouldn't have to look at it. He didn't realize that putting a Wi-Fi access point inside something that blocks signals, like a cage, would cause problems with the Wi-Fi connection. Story 7. We got a message that one of our remote desktop servers was using all of its memory, RAM, and was at 90% CPU usage. This wasn't normal and very concerning. We checked the server and found that one of the users who was logged in was watching 5 different videos at the same time. This server could only be accessed from inside the office, so this person was at work watching a lot of videos. We were called to a place where all the computers were offline. When we got there, we saw that the power pole that provided electricity to the building was missing. It had been struck by lightning. This caused some problems to 2 network switches, the firewall, and half of the computers in the office. We were called to another site because the owner's computer was running very slowly. I sat down to look at the system and saw that all of the internet speed was being used. I looked around and found that the owner was using LimeWire in 2016 to download and upload music all the time. A nephew had set it up for him and turned off the anti-malware software. His computer was full of malware. We kept getting calls from a client saying that in the afternoon their network speeds would drop dramatically. We spent a whole day trying to figure out the problem and thought we had solved it. But the next day, it happened again. We went back and started looking into the issue more deeply. We noticed a lot of network traffic coming from one IP address. We checked all the computers and phones, but we couldn't find anything with that IP address. So we went to the network closet where the main switch and firewall were. One of us noticed that there was one port on the switch that would become active in the afternoon, and that's when all the network problems would start. We disconnected it and all the network issues stopped immediately. We followed the cable and found that someone had hidden a Bitcoin miner at the bottom of the network closet under some cables. Once they found out who did it, that person was fired. Now I wonder if they made enough from Bitcoin for it to be worth getting fired. Story 8. When I was desk-side support years ago, I had an employee in my building come up to me first thing on a Monday morning and hand me a sticky note with the name of a company computer. He says he was traveling the week before and was staying in a hotel. Back then, probably still now, networks in hotels were not really secure and wide open. This was in the mid to late 2000s. So the guy connects and for fun, he looks at what other computers are on the hotel network. He spots one computer that has our office naming convention, so obviously another employee. He opens up the computer and sees that there is a share available on the PC. He opens it up and then sees its bunch of images, but not just normal images. He obviously freaks out, doesn't know what to do, so he just writes down the name of the computer. He didn't know who to contact, so he came to IT. I forwarded the information to our director of IT security. It was a relatively new group, and he said he could take care of it. I never heard of the fallout. I never asked if anything came from it. I just assumed the person was identified and they were terminated and likely faced charges. But for sure, one of the wildest things I've had to deal with. Story 9. When I took over a new store, I needed to move all the employees to a new computer network domain. As the IT guy, I told everyone I would transfer their files, bookmarks, and passwords for them. I started going through the process and everything seemed normal until I got to the sales department. The sales manager had a folder named Asians. At first, I didn't think anything bad about it because of the industry we were in. I thought it might be a way a Southern man would label a certain type of product. The manager's office was full of religious items, and he even had a radio playing a preacher's sermons all day. His wife worked in the same building too. But when I clicked on the folder to move it, I found it was full of 100 gigabyte videos. This was a new client, and I didn't want to get involved in any drama, so I moved everything except that folder. The sales manager was getting a new computer, so I just gave him the password to his old one and told him to use a USB drive to move anything else he wanted to his personal computer. I basically deleted everything except that folder. Over the next few days, the manager thanked me many times. We both knew what had happened, and I wasn't going to get involved in his personal life or whatever his wife did or didn't know. The same store also had several salespeople who had their personal Google accounts signed in on their work computers with all their sites listed. Some even had bookmarks on their browser's bookmarks bar with really inappropriate tags, and these were on unlocked computers before I took over. Now, I don't judge what people are into, everyone has their own tastes and interests, but I don't want to see that kind of stuff on work computers. That's why I work in corporate IT and not with individual consumers. It makes my job really awkward when I have to decide what to do each time I find something like this, because it can be a big security risk and I might have to say something about it. I don't know where I should be amazed. The fact he had over 100 gigabytes of those kinds of videos, or he thanked the guy like he just saved him. Story 10. A long time ago, I was the IT person for a company that sold medical supplies. The owner of the company was worried that the employees were looking at videos while they were at work, and he wanted me to check if anyone was doing this. Most of the employees work on the first floor in a big open room with low walls between their desks, so everyone could see what was on each other's computer screens. I asked if I could buy special software that would let me monitor what websites people were visiting, but the owner said no. I explained that the only thing I could do was to look in the employees' computer files for any pictures that might be inappropriate. The owner told me to go ahead and do that. So I searched for JPEG image files on the employees' computers, and I found something surprising. The CEO, who was the top person in the company, had photos of his wife, who was also the second in command at the company. When the owner asked me if I had discovered any inappropriate content, I carefully said I didn't find anything inappropriate on any of the computers downstairs, and he seemed happy with that answer. About a year later, the CFO, the chief financial officer, who was my boss, was being treated badly by the CEO and his wife, and he decided to leave the company. I told him about the photos I had found, and he didn't seem to believe me at first. But when I showed him the picture, his reaction was priceless. He said, "I wish you had shown me that before they invited me to have dinner at their house." Story 11. I've shared this story before. We had a client who called us in a panic because a member's record was missing from their database, and they needed it back right away. I logged into their system and checked the logs. It turned out that the person who called us had deleted the record, and they had a history of deleting records. The software they were using wasn't very good, so whenever they deleted something from the database, we had to go in and restore it from a backup. This was a complicated process, and we charged about $700 for it. We would sometimes not charge clients if it was clearly an accident, but this person was being rude and blaming us for the mistake. So I told them the restoration fee and made it clear that they were the ones who deleted the record and I had proof, so we wouldn't waive the fee. I was polite but firm. The head of their organization then called our company's president, who liked to think of himself as a man of the people. He was a spoiled rich kid who used some of his parents' money to buy a piece of software that was now 2 decades out of date. It served a niche market full of people who didn't know much about technology, so they were paying way too much for the service they were getting. He called for a big meeting with multiple departments to discuss this serious issue. I was confused but went to the meeting anyway. I also had one foot out the door at this point because I had a side business that was about to become my main job when the right time came. At the meeting, he told us that he got a call from the head of the client's organization saying there was a bug in the software that was deleting records. When I realized what he was talking about, I laughed and said no, that wasn't a bug. Before I could explain further, he shut me down in front of everyone, so I just sat back quietly to see what would happen next. My notes explaining the problem were available if anyone wanted to look at them. He ended up wasting about a week of time for the software and web development teams, having them work on the supposedly buggy product. The software did have a lot of bugs, but this wasn't one of them. After that week, they called everyone in, and both departments were really frustrated because they couldn't find any bug or replicate the error. And that's when I raised my hand. The president let me speak, but he wasn't happy about it. I pointed out that my notes said the user had deleted the record in question. The software team said they checked the log and found nothing. The person I had initially talked to had sneakily deleted the logs, but I had saved a copy on my own computer. I showed this to everyone, and they realized they had been sent on a wild goose chase to fix a problem that wasn't even real. I didn't get a thank you or even an apology. Instead, I was scolded for not mentioning this at the first meeting. I just shook my head and handed in my 2 weeks' notice shortly after. Suddenly, they went from being angry with me to trying really hard to get me to stay, but I was done with that place. Alright, if you're connecting with any of the stories so far in this video, please don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos just like this. Story 12. It was during 2006, I got a text message warning me about high temperature and high humidity in our server room at a research village. This college was located in a renovated area, and I really loved my job and the offices there because of the architecture. But then something bad happened. When I arrived and opened the door to the server room, I was shocked to find out it was actually raining inside. There was water dripping from every part of the ceiling. I quickly ran to a computer and turned off all the servers and equipment I could from there, while also calling 911 to get the fire department to come. I did this because we had big battery backup units at the bottom of every server rack, and there was a risk of electrical shock. I had to stop Dean from walking into the room because he was worried about sensitive data and the cost of the millions of dollars worth of hardware that was getting wet. He didn't think about the dangerous voltages and the short circuit that could happen if someone stepped into the few inches of water that had collected. With the help of the fire department, we turned off the power to the whole building. When we looked up above the ceiling, we found an old sprinkler head that was still connected. It wasn't like any modern sprinkler I had seen before. The server room was built on the main wall where water pipes used to be in, and this was done because it allowed for a lot of space for the servers. It seemed that during the initial renovations, someone missed an old lead pipe when they were updating the fire suppression system. This hidden pipe probably broke because it was old and because the very dry air from the server room's air conditioning had been affecting it for many years. I'm proud to say that we didn't lose any data at all. Since it was the middle of the night, all the backup systems had already run, and everything was copied to remote locations. Nobody was actively working, so we were able to get everything back to working order. We did lose about 25% of our hardware, but I think that's a really good outcome considering what had happened. Story 13. I got a call saying that a server was down and couldn't be connected to. I called the data center operators to check in on it, and they said the server was plugged in. I asked them to turn it off and on again to reset it. They said they would, but after 15 minutes, the server still wasn't working. I called back, and they insisted that the server was plugged in and getting power both to the machine and to the rack it was in. So I decided I needed to go there and check it out myself. When I arrived, the operators seemed like they were trying to avoid me or pretend to be busy. It was really dark in there with no lights turned on at all. To be fair, I never felt comfortable around those guys. Their behavior and how they treated people was really bad. Sometimes the stereotypes about obsessive IT people are true, and this was definitely one of those times. They turned the lights on in the area where I needed to work. When I looked at the rack where our server was, there was no lights on the machine. I checked the back and saw that it wasn't plugged in at all. In fact, the whole rack was a mess. They admitted that they had been running temporary servers during off hours by borrowing power and network connections from different systems, including ours, which we use 24/7. When I asked why they were doing this, they apologized and said it was for testing purposes only. I wasn't sure if I believed them. I quietly fixed the rack and got all the services back up and running in about 2 minutes. I reported this incident to much people higher up in the company than I normally would, one of the perks of working in a small company, I guess. And they contacted the senior managers of the data center. 2 months passed by, and we didn't hear anything else about it. The next time we visited to install something, we saw that there was an elderly new staff at the data center with bright lights and cameras everywhere. They told us that the old staff had been fired and the situation had been handed over to the authorities. It turned out that those guys were lying about testing. They were actually running their own servers, and they kept changing which servers they were stealing power and network connections from to avoid getting caught. They were using multiple internet connections to do this. The FBI eventually caught them, and this was the final piece of evidence in a larger investigation. From what we heard, all of them went to prison except for one who cooperated with the FBI and helped shut down another 5 or 6 data centers run by different companies. Now, these guys were really strange. I hope they had to serve their time in the general prison population. Story 14. I worked at a local company that provided IT services to small businesses, which is like being the external IT department for them. I was given a job to return a laptop to a customer because we had found out that it was broken. They only gave me the name of the business, and that was all the information I had. I went into the law office and started talking to the receptionist about the situation. I asked if I could just leave the laptop at the front desk for her boss, but she wanted me to stay and explain everything to her. When she came out from the back, I was very polite and introduced myself. Then I asked for her name so I could remember it when I went back to my office. I explained to her that the laptop was broken, but it was no longer covered by the warranty and fixing it would cost more than buying a new one. After I left the laptop there, I went back to my office. The vice president called me into her office and asked if I had asked anyone for their name. I told her that I probably do that several times every week, but she told me that I should never do that while working for them because it's disrespectful to the customer. I was really confused until she told me that the woman I gave the laptop to had called and complained that I was very disrespectful because I didn't even know her name. So I said, okay, if you want me to just drop off computers without knowing anyone's name, I'm fine with that. They ended my internship for a while because they said they didn't know how to use my time and skills properly and they never called me back. I wasn't happy with anyone involved in that situation. Story 15. There's so many stories from my time working in IT that I can barely remember 90% of them. While most of them aren't wild in a strange way, there's one that still makes me laugh. So a guy came in with a brand new top-of-the-line iMac that had just been delivered to his house the day before. He had ordered it with the new wireless Magic Mouse that was an option at the time. He was furious, absolutely losing his mind because his brand new custom-ordered iMac wouldn't turn on. Apple's phone support had told him to bring it into a store since custom orders couldn't be easily replaced. As he went on and on about how Apple went downhill after Steve Jobs passed and how their products were overpriced, designed to break right when the new ones come out, I quietly started to unbox his computer and set it up to see what was wrong. I made sure to use the power cord and mouse that came with his computer so he couldn't say, "It just magically works with your equipment but not mine at home, huh?" I plugged it into the power, pressed the power button, and it made the startup chime and turned on. He stopped mid-rant and asked, "What did you do? How did you get it to do that?" I simply said, "I plugged it in and pressed the..." He interrupted me and asked, "You did what? Plugged what?" I replied, "I plugged the power cord in." There was a long silence. Then he said, No, this is supposed to be wireless. I specifically bought the wireless one." It took me a second to understand what he meant, and then I realized he thought the wireless part of the new features in the description, which referred to the wireless mouse option, meant the whole computer was somehow wireless. We're talking about a desktop computer here. We went back and forth for a while. As I explained, that wasn't the case since it's still a desktop computer, and even if it were like a laptop, it would still need a power cable to charge the battery. Instead of just saying, "Oh, I totally misunderstood that, my bad," and having a quick laugh together, he just said, "Oh, well, that's pretty stupid that you still have to plug it in." Since he continued to be angry and I had no reason nor desire to care about his happiness, I said, if that were the case and this computer somehow got electricity wirelessly from the outlet on the wall, any wall, that would mean that the 120-volt AC would be traveling across the room, any size room, and into this computer. If that were somehow possible, I don't think that would be very safe, would it? He grunted a few times, didn't say anything else, and angrily grabbed his stuff and stormed out. Story 16. I went to a person's house to install a new computer. I was working for a company that sounds like Geek Squad. Doing IT installations in people's homes is always an adventure, and I have seen a lot of strange things over the years. Because of this, my ability to notice warning signs had become weaker. When you see crazy things over and over, they just start to seem less crazy. So during this installation, I was unpacking the new PC and working on copying the data from the owner's old computer. He was a man in his 50s and his computer was full of stuff. Even the desktop background was a picture of something. It wasn't a big deal to me though because I had seen much weirder things. While I was working, he spent about an hour in the room with me, having a very forward conversation about things. He then asked me some inappropriate things, and this kind of talk went on for a while. At first, I felt a bit flattered, but really my broken warning system should have been working better. I politely turned down his advances the whole time. When it was time to pack up my equipment and boxes, I headed to the front door of the house while he was supposed to be writing a check for the services I provided. I found the front door locked. When I tried to unlock it, I suddenly felt him behind me. I quickly got away from him and ran out of there. I called the store and they called the police. It turned out that the man used to be a city official who was already facing charges from other incidents. The police came and took my statement. After that, I never did another in-home installation again. The company, similar to the Nest guy situation, offered me a job in their warehouse for about $8 an hour when I refused to do any more in-home installations. I quit and found work somewhere else instead. Story 17. One time, a woman called who seemed to be upset because the technician wouldn't return to set up her internet and cable. I called the technician who had been there, and he told me that next to her computer behind a sheet was a bobcat. We called the authorities, and the woman called me back later, angry that we had called the police. They fined her, took the animal away, and she wanted us to pay her fine. Another lady said she could only get on the internet when she was making toast. She said her coaxial cable, which is used for cable internet and TV, went into her toaster. When she made toast, the internet would work, and when the toast was done and popped up, the internet would stop working. I asked her to describe the cable, and she described it correctly, but insisted for 5 minutes that it went into her toaster. She was in her 60s, so I thought she might have dementia. I also got lots of calls from people who were paranoid that the FBI was listening in on them. They wanted us to trace the calls and confront the FBI. Some people even wanted us to secure their Wi-Fi because their neighbor was using their unrestricted router, and they wanted us to charge half of the bill to the neighbor. I often got calls for unrelated information. People would say, "Connect me to the Exxon shareholders line," and I would respond, "Ma'am, this isn't the operator. Press 0 or dial 411 for information." They would ask, "Well, who are you?" And I would say, "IT support." Then they would demand, "I need information," as if we were Google on a phone line. Many people argue that their TVs or computers didn't need electricity to run. They would say, "It has batteries, it doesn't need electricity." The amount of ignorance I dealt with every day was absurd. One lady said she couldn't look at where her Ethernet cable was going because something bad would happen. Often, people would try to plug in a phone line instead of the Cat5 cable, so I wanted to make sure her lack of internet wasn't due to the cable being loose or not even plugged in at all. She argued with me for like 10 minutes, saying that if she looked at it, something bad would happen. We also had some funny moments during repairs. One time, a guy brought in his desktop computer for repairs, and the background image was not user-friendly. A new guy had just started, so we fixed the customer's computer and made the new guy show the customer that everything was working fine. When the new guy clicked on the start button and saw what was on the screen, with a line of people behind the customer and everyone could see the desktop, he turned bright red. My boss was furious, but we were in the back, laughing hard. Story 18. I have some IT stories that aren't about how silly the people with tech problems can be. Some of these stories are more about the people I've worked for in the past. I used to be the manager of a small computer store. The owner hired me because I had experience as a PC technician and had managed a store before. It was a bookstore. I could handle orders, answer phones, and do other tasks. The reason most small businesses don't do well is usually clear when you work for one. It's often because of the owner. Our store was in a wealthy area and many of our customers were rich. I used to spend time trying to find affordable computer systems that would give people more value for their money. But our customers didn't need that. They just wanted the best we could offer. Often, someone would come in and say, "This computer looks good, I'll buy it." And it would be our display model, which I was happy to sell, but the owner didn't like that. He would say, "If you sell it, you'll have to build another one." I would respond, "And if we keep it on display, it loses value every minute as new technology makes it outdated." This was the kind of logical argument I had trouble explaining to the owner. I ordered a bunch of computer parts to sell and put them on our empty display shelves, but the owner got upset and said, "I don't want the store to look like Best Buy." I couldn't understand why he didn't want his store to look like a successful electronics giant. Then he decided that, despite my experience as a tech, I was the right person to deal with customers because I was good with people. He wanted me to answer the phones and talk to the customers who came in while he would handle more of the tech support duties. Since most of our business was fixing computers, not selling them for obvious reasons, the number of computers that needed to be worked on kept growing and growing and growing. We even bought more tables to hold them all. I started putting tags on the computers with all the information about them. This is how we would keep track of who owned each machine and what we were being paid to fix or upgrade. I started doing this back in 1997, years before I worked at Geek Squad and saw a similar system using paperwork and stickers. Unfortunately, one of the first things the owner would often do when working on a computer was to pull off the tag and leave it on a table. We often didn't know which computer had what problems or who it belonged to. I had to leave notes on the tag saying, "Do not remove this tag, important." The owner insisted he could remember all this stuff without tags, but that just wasn't true. It was sad. One day, a man came in wanting his CD-ROM drive replaced, which is a simple and quick job. He asked if it could be done quickly. The owner said yes, he would do it himself. I told him there were a lot of computers ahead of him, about 30, and we were very behind. He assured me he would take care of it himself. The man left his computer, and a few seconds later, the owner left for the day, as he often did, and never mixed the machine at all. The next day, the man came back to find that his computer didn't have a new CD-ROM drive, and I felt bad for him. He started shouting, "This is absurd, you heard him, he said he would do it." All I could say was, "I know," while I kept working on another computer, even though I had to answer the phones and handle walk-in customers alone. I asked the owner to hire my smart and pretty girlfriend to answer the phones and deal with customers while I did the tech work. We tried this for a day, but then he decided it wasn't a good idea. I got another friend to come in and do the same job, but he didn't like that either. I got another friend who was a tech to come in and help with the tech work, but the owner didn't go for it. So what did he do to solve this problem? He hired the Sasquatch. The owner wanted the Sasquatch to stay in the back room and do the tech work while I handled the customers in the front. The problem? The guy was just not very smart. One day, a man visiting our city from out of town came in needing a fast modern installation. We took his computer and told the Sasquatch it needed a new modem. We gave him the modem with the PC, and it was a priority. It had to be done with the drivers loaded in 2 hours. The man came back as expected, so we asked the Sasquatch to bring the PC out. He brought it out, and the man started to write a check, then noticed, there's no modem in there? On another occasion, one of the Sasquatch's friends came into the store and he wanted to show him a new motherboard he thought was cool. He opened the brand new box from the display shelf, took it out of the protective anti-static sleeve, and held it up in his hand like serving a tray. He wasn't wearing anti-static straps or anything. When I confronted him about it, he said that if the owner didn't want things to get damaged by static shocks, he should provide us with wrist straps instead of expecting his techs who don't know how to handle electronic equipments. Needless to say, that motherboard ended up broken. The owner's plan of using the Sasquatch as backroom help didn't work either. If he overheard a conversation in the front that interested him, he would come out to join the discussion and scare off the customers. The worst part was that after the owner refused to hire any of the people I brought in, he wouldn't let me fire the Sasquatch. I told him either it was him or me, and after trying to manage the Sasquatch for a while, it actually made me sick, so I quit. Later, I came back to see if the owner had my tax forms, and the Sasquatch was the only one working there. He seemed to think everything was going to be fine without me. The store closed down a few months later, and the owner ended up working for Dell. The owner hadn't been withholding anything for taxes, but luckily I was keeping track of my hours in a spreadsheet, so I gave the correct figures to the IRS. Sure, there were occasionally strange customers, but nothing compared to the illogical behavior of the owner or the odd uselessness of the Sasquatch. Story 19. I worked in WAN, Wide Area Network Support at the head office of a shipping company. This was over 20 years ago, and we had 2,300 computers spread across the world, all running in a Windows NT environment. One day, I received a call from the legal department. The first thing they asked was for my name, which immediately raised some alarm bells for me. Then came the real issue. After her computer had been updated over the weekend, all the windows she had opened on her desktop were gone. She wanted us to restore the windows to exactly where they were before the operating system update. During the same shift, a salesman called to ask if we could cover a PowerPoint presentation he had been working on for the past 2 weeks on his take-home laptop. His kid had installed a game and a malware at the same time, and the PowerPoint file was gone along with a lot of other stuff. He didn't have much of a backup and didn't have an explanation for why this kid was using the company laptop. I got in trouble for 2 inappropriate responses, even though I offered the lawyer a half hour of my time after my shift to show her how to resize Windows and save her setup. Alright, if any of these stories got to you, you're welcome in advance. And of course, thank you for hanging out with me. Here's more videos YouTube thinks you're going to love. I'll catch you in that video, and thanks for hanging out with me on this one.